The Newsagents USA.
All right, Carrie, other than how Ms. Daniels comported herself during this testimony, what else about her appearance stood out to you and how that might impact the jury?
Well, it was a bit odd because, this is a criminal trial involving the former president of the United States. So each witness has dressed and presented themselves in a somewhat formal manner or a put together way. And just oddly, Stormy Daniels came in with her hair kind of pulled back in a clip with all kinds of hair coming out as if she hadn't brushed it, quite frankly, and had what looked almost like a hoodie, but it was a coat. She was dressed very casually, and I started thinking, is this an intentional,
If you're a Fox News show, there is nothing more egregious than a woman with her hair sticking out who does not look formally enough dressed for court. That's the Laura Ingraham show, and she's talking to the legal editor there about Stormy Daniels, no less, who surprised pretty much all of us by suddenly appearing in court yesterday to testify against her once lover, Donald Trump, allegedly.
Under oath, she told us about Donald Trump's black silk pyjamas. Under oath, she told us about how she was in the missionary position. She told us about the toiletries he had. She told us about the little rolled up magazine with which she slapped his bottom. It's extraordinary to think that this is the former president of the United States who in November could be the next president of the United States. And all this playing out in a courthouse in downtown Manhattan.
We're going to take you through every twist and turn of the testimony Stormy Daniels gave, not just the salacious details, but how she may have moved the dial in this criminal trial. Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And it's also Stormy. I mean, there's going to be a lot of Stormy. And sadly, because there are no TV cameras, there are no mics allowed in the court, we can't bring you the audio from the trial. But what we will be doing is hearing from someone, a correspondent, who is actually inside the court. They have to bring binoculars with them to spot every detail so that they miss nothing, because it's so big, so vast. They want to be able to catch the expressions on everyone's face as they're actually speaking.
And you can only begin to imagine the expression on Donald Trump's face when he heard, somewhat by surprise, that the prosecution was calling as its witness that day one Stormy Daniels, the person with whom he was alleged to have had a one-night stand and who was paid $130,000 just before the election to keep her quiet so that she wouldn't upset Donald Trump's election campaign.
Yep.
And Stormy Daniels, let's face it, has been out there for the past few years since it was revealed that there had been this gagging order and it had been broken, and she has gone after Donald Trump with alacrity.
So let us set the scene, because it was a dark and stormy night. No, it wasn't. It was in Lake Tahoe.
You couldn't resist that, could you?
I could not. 2006 at a golf tournament in Nevada, in Lake Tahoe, where she was apparently called over by one of his staff and invited to dinner with Donald Trump. He wasn't then the president. He hadn't even thought about being the president. And the staff said, come on, you might as well go out to dinner with him. It'll be a good story. She then finds out that the dinner is actually in his hotel room. And she describes how he was very interested as they dined, that he wanted to know all about the porn industry in which she worked. And he wasn't asking questions actually about, as it turns out, the sex or the missionary position. He was asking whether there were trade union workers, what the pay was like, how they got their ideas about the plots for the films and all the rest of it. And she said he was clearly quite bright and he asked interesting questions. They have dinner. She then pops off to the bathroom.
And
when
finds that she's dessert.
And she is dessert. When she comes back, she describes in her testimony how the president is sitting on the bed waiting for her. And even though she is involved in the sex industry and she works in porn and she's a sex worker, she describes a sense of feeling slightly trapped, that there is a bodyguard outside the door, that she maybe wasn't expecting this to all kind of unfold quite so quickly, but it is consensual and she has sex with him and she thinks that's the end of the story. She makes a point of saying that he wasn't really trying to keep it private. He didn't really mind his new wife, Melania, finding out about this because he described that they had separate bedrooms, didn't even sleep in the same bed.
Yeah, and let's just be clear about something from the get-go. Yeah. Nothing here we're describing is illegal. I mean, you could say it's improper in terms of his relationship with Melania, but, this is about a court case that is to do with Donald Trump paying her $130,000 to keep stum so that she doesn't blow the lid on this relationship, particularly after the Access Hollywood tapes that had come out and done Trump so much damage where he said, you can grab a woman by the pussy. And so I think the Trump campaign were desperate to avoid another moment. So they're thinking, where have we got problems that we need to shut down? Stormy Daniels is a problem we need to shut down.
Yeah, she wasn't paid at the time. She wasn't paid after that night. She says that she was threatened years later in a car park in Las Vegas. And she was told not to talk about the encounter, and she described reaching a deal. Presumably, she then said, well, what are you going to pay me to shut up? We don't know. But they reached a deal of £130,000 not to speak publicly. And the reason it was important was because this was on the cusp of the 2016 presidential election. In other words, for almost 10 years, he hadn't cared about that encounter at all, didn't really care about his wife or family finding out, but he did want to shut it down before he went to the American people and said, choose me as your president.
So that is why this is so relevant to the case that is being heard. Because one of the arguments that has been put forward by Trump surrogates is that the only motivation he had for paying off Stormy Daniels was so that Melania didn't find out that he'd had an affair when they were married. Family values man. It would be very bad for their marriage. And Donald Trump was just trying to cover this up in the quietest way possible, got his lawyer to give us some money just to
make it go away.
Yeah, but as Emily says, this hadn't been done for years. It was the proximity of the presidential election in November 2016 that had spurred Michael Cohen, Trump's Mr. Fix-It lawyer, into action. And that is why that there was a demand that she sign this non-disclosure agreement about what had gone on in their relationship.
And this money came from campaign funds that was never disclosed. And that is, in essence, why Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor in New York, in Manhattan, has been able to bring this case, called loosely the hush money case, but it's actually about campaign financing and what was not declared before Donald Trump asked the American people for their vote. So that's the background to this case. In court, what do we know? We know that Donald Trump was deeply unhappy with her testimony, that he kept on harumphing and making noises under his breath to the point where the judge had to pull Susan Neckles' attorney aside and say, please tell your client not to make those noises. He could be accused of intimidating the witness. At times, he was the one pushing his attorney to stand up and say, I object. That there were no, forthcoming objections, even in places where Stormy Daniels' testimony got a bit juicy.
Well, I mean, there was one point where Donald Trump was seen to mouth bullshit over one of the claims that Stormy Daniels had made about what had gone on in that bedroom. And there was also the suggestion that the judge himself, Juan Marchand, was surprised that the Trump defense team hadn't pushed back more and said that this is, should not be admissible into court.
Well, let's hear from Susie Cohen. She's the US correspondent for The Telegraph. She has been in the courthouse. Susie, did you have your binoculars with you? Apparently, you're no use unless you have binoculars in court these days.
I do have my binoculars with me. Trusty pair ordered off Amazon for $21. Yes, you have to. Sometimes it feels like there's too much to watch at one time. You're trying to watch, yesterday we had Stormy Daniels, trying to keep an eye on her. And then also you're trying to dart your eyes across the room to see Donald Trump, huffing and puffing, shaking his head, muttering under his breath. So, yeah, there's a lot going on at once, to say the least.
What was Trump's demeanour like yesterday?
So, as I'm sure you've seen, there's been quite a few days where we've been guessing whether he's been falling asleep. He seemed very subdued. That wasn't the case yesterday. He was alert. He was watching what was going on, shaking his head, prodding his lawyers, speaking to his lawyers, to the extent that the judge told Mr. Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, to, he was audibly saying things, visibly shaking his head. He didn't want to say anything out loud because it would be embarrassing for him, but it could be intimidating for the witness, and the jury can see everything he's doing. So, he was by no means a wallflower yesterday.
And were you watching the jury, watching Stormy Daniels? Because I've sort of heard differing reports, Susie, that at some points it was almost like she sort of went a bit too far. It was a bit too graphic, and there was a question of whether she was actually losing the jury at those moments rather than sort of pulling them in.
Yes, definitely. There were moments. I mean, at first she appeared quite nervous on the stand, but it didn't take her long to soften. And she was talking to the jury, looking directly at them, as if she was talking to a group of old school friends. But, the jury looked engaged the entire time, taking notes. But, it was a lot to be hearing in a courtroom with a former and potentially future US president.
Yeah, I mean, the extraordinary nature of it can't be exaggerated, can it? That you've got the former president and possibly the next president, and you've got a woman in court testifying about how she was in the missionary position with him. Did you feel that Stormy Daniels kind of ever lost it, was going beyond what she wanted to say, or was she pretty studied in terms of, I know how far I can go, I know what I want to say, I know what I don't want to say?
I think she did go a bit further than perhaps she was planning to at times. It didn't feel studied, as you say. It felt like someone maybe oversharing slightly, after a drink or something in the pub, not saying that she was drinking, but it was sort of like describing someone who's disassociated in the way that she was recounting that sexual act.
There was one specific moment which seemed to sort of shift the dial a bit on the actual legal issue at the heart of this, and that was when Stormy Daniels was asked whether Trump had told her to keep it confidential, and she said absolutely not. And just to explain that, meaning that it wasn't that he was worried about Melania finding out, it was only years later when he decided to stand for the presidency in 2016 that it became a thing. Does that sort of affect this whole portrayal that Trump's lawyers are trying to put across, which is he was a family man and, it's embarrassing, he wanted to keep his wife on side? I mean, was that a moment in court yesterday?
Yes, definitely. And another point was when she said that they spoke about Melania, and she said, she's very beautiful. And he said, oh, don't worry about that. We don't even sleep in the same bed. To be sharing that with the 27-year-old you've just met at a celebrity golf tournament. Yes, that is the heart of one of the defence's arguments, that, as you say, that he's trying to protect his family, and anything that can go against that is very key, obviously. And then he clearly wasn't concerned even then about his wife finding out. So to say that suddenly, years later, he became paranoid about this, just, yes, it definitely helped the prosecution's case.
Susie Cohn.
Susie, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So I think there were a couple of really interesting moments in that testimony. And one came near the end where arguably the defence cornered Stormy Daniels by asking very directly if she hated Donald Trump. And she said, yes. And then they pushed her. Do you want him to go to prison? And she says, I want him to be held accountable. Do you want him to go to prison? If he's found guilty, yes. Now, Stormy Daniels at that point was in full flow, right? She hates him. There is no love lost between those two. She's already given interviews, as you were saying, on, the chat shows, the Jimmy Kimmel show, the late night chat shows, describing his, button mushroom shaped penis and all the rest of it. There is no reason for Stormy Daniels to stand there and say things that could be demonstrably proved otherwise. And yet, by getting her to admit that she hates him, the defence now may find a way of saying to the jury, you see, you're not going to listen to this woman. She's clearly,
she's got an axe to grind.
Yeah.
And I think that is obviously the risk that the prosecution took in putting her on the stand, because, it was going to be rough, and it got rough. And the defence counsel for Trump went after her and wound her up, and she kind of did apparently seem to get quite animated and vexed by the line of questioning. And so, remember, the name of the game here is not to give us entertainment. Yesterday was spectacularly entertaining. Today will be spectacularly entertaining. The name of the game if you are the Trump defence team, is to find one juror who will not vote for prosecution, and then you've got a hung jury, and then Donald Trump walks scot-free.
Or a judge to throw the case out because he thinks that the whole thing has gone off track. But listen to what Donald Trump was trying to do when he came out of court last night. This was Tuesday evening. It's not sitting today. So this was, if you like, the sort of flurry and what he wants to be the takeaway from the day of Stormy Daniels' testimony.
So this was a very big day, a very revealing day. As you see, their case is totally falling apart. They have nothing on books and records, and even something that should bear very little relationship to the case. It's just a disaster for the DA, for the Soros-backed DA. It's a disaster. This whole case is just a disaster. If you read the legal scholars, you'll see, because they're writing about it, they've never seen anything quite like it.
So the whole thing is a disaster, it's all going wrong, never been a trial like it, etc., etc., etc. One other person who has given evidence in the trial is someone who most certainly does not hate Donald Trump, and that is Hope Hicks. She was for years the right-hand woman to him, almost family in the affection in which she was held by Donald Trump. And I went on a number of trips where Hope Hicks was always at the president's side, immaculately turned out, very, very glamorous assistant by Donald Trump. She gave evidence, and some of it was very supportive of Donald Trump, that he could multitask, he could delegate, he could do all sorts of things. But there was one bit that was damning, where she did say that Donald Trump was really worried that this would come out before the election about the payment to Stormy Daniels, and that he was concerned that it shouldn't emerge.
You could not imagine two more different witnesses in court. I mean, Stormy Daniels spoke very fast at the beginning, as you've heard, was quite nervous, but then sort of visibly, to all accounts, relaxed and started quite enjoying, a bit of the performance. Hope Hicks essentially broke down in tears. She did not want to be there. She did not want to be testifying against her old boss. She still clearly has a lot of affection for him. She was sort of straining round in the courtroom from what we've learned to sort of catch his face, waiting almost for his approval. And I think felt caught between having to do her duty under oath and dumping him in it when she didn't really want to.
I mean, she made it absolutely clear in court that she had been subpoenaed and therefore had no option but to appear in court, and that it was not her choice to be there. So Hope Hicks we've heard from. Stormy Daniels we will hear some more from. Of course, the other person we're really waiting to see on the stand is Michael Cohen, because that too is going to be fireworks. But don't think this is the only legal issue in town. It's not. Trump is facing multiple indictments for multiple criminal offences, and he had some good news yesterday from Florida, where the judge who is overseeing the case into him squirreling away all those classified documents at Mar-a-Lago had said, I'm indefinitely postponing this case because of the complexities about, kind of Official Secrets Act and all the rest of it.
Yeah, Aileen Cannon's the judge. She basically made his day by saying, this is not one of those trials you have to worry about now. All Trump has been trying to do is get them pushed so far back that they end up being sat after the election. He doesn't really care about that because he thinks he can find a way of dealing with whatever comes once he's sort of won the election again. And so that has gone. The other legal issue that's been following Trump around is the question of his gag order. In other words, when he speaks out about a witness or about a judge or about somebody in the judge's family, he's not allowed to do that, and he can face a $1,000 fine. And the judge has left this sort of Damoclean sword hanging over him that if he carries on breaking the gag order, it could result in prison. Last night, he posted something on Truth Social and then quickly deleted it. But we also got just the whiff from Trump that maybe prison, short prison, little tiny weeny prison sentence was something that he sort of felt he ought to embrace, because after all, he does think he's Nelson Mandela.
You asked me a question, a simple question. I'd like to give it, but I can't talk about it because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it. And frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day.
Yeah, because Donald Trump, as we know, is all about self-sacrifice, and that's always been the hallmark of his presidency, his run-up to office, the way he's conducted his life. I think there was irony meant to have been inserted there. Because, I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is willing to go to jail, I think he says that. I'm not so sure that if he ended up in Rikers, he'd be ever so thrilled about that.
I guess it depends, doesn't it? Like 20-minute whip round, you know, I've been to jail. Got the T-shirt.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he wants to do a month there.
No, exactly so. And it's quite interesting listening to the surrogates, the friends, the family of Donald Trump arguing that what Donald Trump is about, and remember January the 6th as I say this, is all about upholding the Constitution of the United States of America. This is his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump.
I think that anyone who looks at this and can sleep at night knowing this is happening in America better get serious. Donald Trump has said this is much bigger than him. This is about standing up for the United States Constitution. He has said, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? If he does not stand up for the rights of himself as an American citizen, Sean, then we're all done.
So Lara Trump, surrogate, still, you know, doing the rounds for Trump and sort of carrying the message. Very few members of his family actually with him in the courtroom. I think Eric, Lara's husband, Trump's second son, was with him on a couple of days last week. But essentially, you keep getting the sense of quite an isolated figure in the courtroom. He's not surrounded by a zillion fans, a zillion members of the family, a zillion sort of supporters.
And remember, the zillion supporters are the lifeblood of Donald Trump. That's what keeps him going. He wants to plug in to the adoration that is so conspicuously absent in downtown Manhattan on the 15th floor in that courthouse. But he has been at Mar-a-Lago, and he's been casting an eye over people who could be his vice presidential pick. More on that in a moment.
Still think that you are in line to be Trump's vice president?
No, it's up to Donald Trump. He's the only person who will decide this. He's the only person who will decide. And I do speak to him.
May I ask what he said to you about being vice president?
I never tell anybody my personal conversations with
Did the dog story
President
come up
Trump.
in a conversation with Trump?
I talk to President Trump all the time.
About the dog?
About a lot of things. And right now, I tell you what, he is being persecuted in a political witch hunt in this court case. So I'm proud of him about how tough he is and how well he is doing.
Did you bring up the dog?
Yes, enough, Stuart.
With Trump? Did you
this
bring up the
interview
dog
is
with Trump?
ridiculous, what you were doing right now. So you need to stop. It is.
That was Kristi Noem, America's answer to Cruella de Vil. If you listened last week, you'll remember that we told you about her in her own book, telling us the story of how she shot her 14-month-old puppy because it was annoying.
Yes, and it wasn't doing what she thought it ought to be doing, so took it to a gravel pit, boom, bye-bye, puppy. That hasn't gone down ever so well.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Weird that you'd think that in a nation of animal lovers that wouldn't be acceptable. But Kristi Noem, who is the governor of South Dakota and potentially a vice presidential pick, as we could hear there from that interview, getting increasingly annoyed with a Fox interviewer about being asked about poor old Cricket, the dead dog.
And whether Donald Trump had been offended enough by the story or savvy enough to think, I'm not sure I want her at my side. Can you imagine the posters?
Exactly. But Kristi Noem, I mean, this book that she has produced is an absolute corker because, one, she thought it would be fine to tell the story of killing the puppy. Hasn't gone terribly well. And it also includes in the book a meeting she had with Kim Jong-un, which never took place. And she's trying to cover that up too by just saying, I don't want to talk about private conversations.
I don't talk about my private conversations with world leaders.
Brackets, you never met Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, and if you were going to pick one name to try and garner the admiration of Donald Trump, like out of the blue, you'd probably say, Kim Jong-un.
Well, let's hear it.
I guess you said you met Kim Jong-un. Mm-hmm. Did you meet him?
I've been to the DMZ. I've been to North Korea. You know, I don't talk about my conversations with world leaders. And so when I looked at the book and I saw that excerpt, I decided to make the change to the content of the book, and that's been done.
So you didn't have a conversation with Kim when you were at the DMZ?
I don't have conversations about my conversations with world leaders. I've been working on policy for 30 years, Jesse, and that's what most people don't remember about me is I'm old. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I've got 3 little grandbabies.
You're not that old. So maybe you did have a conversation with Kim, but you don't want to talk about it.
I will not talk about my personal conversations with any world leaders. It just won't, and I'm not going to do it.
Don't ask her questions like that. She's a mom.
And a grandmum.
And a grandmum, you know? And if you've met Kim Jong-un, the last thing he'd want is like the Queen. You just don't go spilling the beans. Don't just
Emily,
go to conversations.
I've been to Moscow, but I'm not prepared to tell you what the private meetings or the conversations I might have had with Vladimir Putin.
With Stalin.
With Stalin.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, exactly.
Brezhnev.
So she's not having a great old week, but this last weekend, Donald Trump invited some of the runners and riders, apprentice style, to Mar-a-Lago. And it's kind of meant to be a fundraiser, but it's also kind of meant to be a beauty contest. I mean, we can call it an audition for anyone who might think of themselves as his vice president. And so on the list you have, for example, Tim Scott, who's the guy that dropped out of the Republican candidates race, very, very lavishly praising Donald Trump, even though he'd actually been appointed to his own job by Nikki Haley, who stood against Trump. And you've also got Doug Burgum, who's a very wealthy, actually another Dakota governor, North Dakota governor, who actually got on surprisingly well with Trump and may very well make the cut if Trump's looking for a man. It is more likely, we think, that he's going to find a woman VP just because electorally, that's where his problems lie. Women don't really like Trump, and so he might need a woman, he thinks, to pull them on side.
Yeah, and that kind of raises the question of a New York congresswoman called Elise Stefanik, who's very smart, very capable, very Trumpian. She was a moderate Republican who's become very, very pro-Trump. Doug Burgum, I think, actually is a very serious candidate because he's straight out of the Mike Pence mould. He is never going to steal sunlight from Donald Trump. He's never going to be the one who wants to put himself forward at the expense of Donald Trump. And that is a critical ask of anyone who is going to be Donald Trump's VP pick. I want to go back to Tim Scott because he gave an extraordinary interview on Meet the Press where he is asked, will you accept the result of the 2024 presidential election? For some reason, that is a hypothetical question.
Will you commit to accepting the election results of 2024? Bottom line.
Well, at the end of the day, the 47th president of the United States will be President Donald Trump, and I'm excited to get back to low inflation, low unemployment.
Wait, Senator, yes or no? Yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter who wins?
That is my statement.
But is it just yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024?
I look forward to President Trump being the 47th president. Kristen, you could ask him multiple times.
Senator, just a yes or no answer.
So the American people will make the decision.
But I don't hear you committing
for President Trump. That's clear.
I don't hear you committing to the election results.
Here's the challenge.
Will you commit to accepting the election?
Isn't it amazing to think that would ever be a controversial question? Is that what they call a gotcha? You know, if you roll the clock back 5 years and said,
do you accept the result of the presidential election?
There's a guest asking a potential VP pick if they would accept the result of the election. It's a no-brainer. And the fact that those close to Trump, they're not really struggling. They're not really struggling to answer it.
Exactly.
They're struggling to say what they think he would want them to say.
Bang on.
Right? And that makes it really ugly, really hard to listen to.
Exactly, because they're not saying this because they don't believe in democracy anymore. They're not saying it because they don't accept we the people have spoken.
Yeah.
They're saying it just because they know what Donald Trump wants to hear. And Donald Trump wants to hear you saying, well, it depends what the result is. And Tim Scott, who is a US senator, who wants to be the VP pick for Donald Trump, knows what he has to do to ingratiate himself with the Donald.
Yeah.
And as you say, the word is ugly.
So he has told us now that he's going to be announcing his VP pick in Milwaukee.
And that's where the Republican convention is taking place.
It's the Republican convention, but, you know, having spent time with Donald Trump at his Miss USA beauty contest, there is something that feels so sort of similar to this. There's going to be, I'm sure, rounds and second rounds and third rounds, and we're going to whittle it down, and then they're all going to come down a gold staircase or whatever it is. Two other people we should say are on his list. Your favourite, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, now the Arkansas governor, but the person that you might remember from the West Wing, the briefing rooms, when she was his director of comms, sort of doing the sort of press interfacing for him. And the Alabama Senator Katie Britt, who was the person that we saw sort of huddled in her kitchen after the State of the Union address. Another I'm a mom person. There is nothing wrong with being a mother, but it is amazing how politicians on the political right so often reach for that as a way of saying,
I may express absolutely outlandish views,
but I'm a mum.
I'm a mum, so therefore it's
exactly,
all fine.
It's all fine.
If it's Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that would be a very, very interesting pick. Her dad had been the governor of Arkansas. He had once gone for the presidential nomination and had won the Iowa caucus. Mike Huckabee. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is not your classic Dolly Bird kind of image of a Donald Trump sort of beauty parade person. But she's very effective, and she knows Trump extremely well, his shortcomings and the advantages, and would probably fit in well. But what's going to happen is that the cameras will be invited to set up outside some room somewhere in Milwaukee, and you'll watch them come in and watch them go out. It'll be like you're going for a job interview where you're being filmed as you arrive and as you leave.
It's literally The Apprentice, isn't it?
I mean,
he's taken one series and applied it to his entire life. Let us also talk to you about what happened in Indiana last night, which...
Fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana, I'm not going to call it a swing state, but it is a state that has been a swing state in the past. And it's
been rather Republican of late.
Yeah.
It is also where Pete Buttigieg, the Democrat transportation secretary, came from. He was the mayor of South Bend in Indiana. So kind of Rust Belt Midwest state.
Yeah. But this was quite an interesting primary. And it does sound weird that even though we kind of know that Donald Trump is the Republican candidate for president, the primaries continue because they want to give every state their chance to have their vote. And even though Nikki Haley pulled out of the race 3 months ago now, she still managed to get 22% of the vote. That's nearly 130,000 votes. And I think you have to say, not, is Nikki Haley going to be president? She isn't. But you do have to worry about her getting such a large percentage of the vote in places where Trump is already vulnerable because it's quite marginal.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating because it suggests that the Republican Party has not united around Donald Trump. And I've always thought that the solidity of Trump's base is immense. That 35% of the American
It's very
electorate,
solid.
It's just solid and dense, and it isn't going to change. But for Donald Trump to win the presidential election, he needs to be at 47%. And he's not getting there yet. And there is still the refuseniks in the Republican Party who won't countenance him as the next president after what happened between 2016 and 2020, and of course what happened on the 6th of January 2021 when it looked like he just could not accept giving up the reins of power, and there was the attempted insurrection at the Capitol. I mean, not since Obama won in 2008 has Indiana gone Democrat. So it's a Republican state. But if you've got a sizable number of Republicans who think, I don't want him, then you've got a problem.
I mean, just watch how quickly Biden gets himself to Indiana now.
Yeah.
I would have thought that's, almost a given. Trump won it by 400,000 votes. It's not nothing, but it's pretty easy to take that if you think that there are enough Republicans in Indiana who are going to stay home.
There is an American cultural tradition. It's sort of like the roast, where you take a celebrity, you get other celebrities, and instead of going on and saying, he's so marvellous and I love him so much and isn't he great, he's really wonderful, you do the absolute reverse. You just rip the piss out of that person mercilessly. This weekend, it was Tom Brady, America's most storied quarterback from the New England Patriots and on. And he says, unbelievable career.
America's sweetheart, married a supermodel.
Married a
threatened to
supermodel,
divorce him
fabulously
if he
good
didn't
looking,
leave his job.
6'4", chiseled, articulate, talented, brilliant, la 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 la. Anyway, Some friends, inverted commas, went on stage to talk about him, his supermodel ex-wife, and where that all went wrong, and a few other things besides.
Tom Brady is a patriot, which is surprising considering he looks like a Confederate fag. Clearly your ex-wife takes after you. I hear she's out there draining balls right now. People love you, Tom. You have the same fan base as Kyle Rittenhouse.
You have 7 rings. Well, 8 now that Giselle gave hers back, but...
So this was such a big cultural moment. It was actually streamed on Netflix, and it got us remembering. I mean, I suppose the nearest we have, and this is going to sound pitiful, is PMQs, where they kind of go, ooh, it would be nice if you could get out of London if you don't mind leaving the tube. Ooh, you're from Islington, or ooh, you don't understand what this is, or what woman is, or whatever. Anyway, they do that in PMQs quite a lot to each other. But there was a time not so long ago, 2011 actually, when Donald Trump faced his own roast. This was on Comedy Central. And blimey, if you listen back to it, it does turn out to be quite a thing.
And just if you've never seen it, Donald Trump is sitting on what appears to be a throne. You know, kind of, it's all gilt and it's very Trumpian. And he's trying to keep a smile up while some of this is unfolding.
Now, from me to you, Donald, I wish I had half of your money. But for that, you need a 20-year-old's pussy and a divorce lawyer. Now, I may not have half his paper, but I got twice the dick, and you can believe that. Donald say he wants to run for president and move on into the White House. Why not? It wouldn't be the first time you pushed a black family out of their home.
All jokes aside, though, I was thrilled when they offered me the opportunity to roast such a brilliant, charismatic, totally self-made billionaire who I believe will one day run this country. And then the Facebook guy canceled and we got stuck with your bloated ass. Tonight, we honor a self-made millionaire. He started with nothing, worked hard, and made a fortune. That man is Fred Trump, Donald's dad.
Donald, tonight people will make fun of your looks. Fuck them! You've always gotten beautiful women. You've disappointed more women than Sex and the City 2. You are the ultimate proof that money can buy good-looking pussy. If you were broke, you'd be fucking me.
I mean, let's, not to put too fine a point on it, end where we started, with the testimony that Stormy Daniels would go on to give nearly 14 years after that roast about the money that she was paid to keep her mouth shut after having sex with Donald Trump in a Nevada hotel room.
The past is prologue. We'll be back next week. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.